On today's 7th Circle Gaming, we analyze the open world survival crafting zombie game. Say that one 5 times fast. Days Gone. And we start off as usual with our disclosures, and read these if you like, or we'll move right on to the screenshots. And the first screenshot that we have to share with you is just illustrative of what the game world looks like, along with a little bit about the user interface. And what we're seeing here is a fairly realistically or relatably rendered, that's a better word for it, relatably rendered world presented in a third-person perspective with a lot of the user interface in slightly unusual positions, but not outside of what we would typically expect. And moving right along to our second screenshot. This screenshot is meant to be illustrative of the crafting system, just one part of the crafting system that the game has. Obviously, this looks like a typical weapon wheel, but this is also where the crafting interface is going to be found. And the less said about that, the better, not much more, so let's move right along. Another part of the game, which there seems to be about 3 or 4 parts to it, is the map. However, the map also functions as the sort of quest journal where quests are tracked and markers are placed down to guide players to different objectives. Not much more to say about that. The next screenshot that we have to share with you is the upgrade paths, one of the 3 of which are available to the player. Now we've tried to find the one that we haven't invested a lot of points in just to not provide any spoilers. But the main point is that this exists, and this is one of the 3 or 4 main parts of the game. And with that, we now move on to our first proper chapter, which is Immersion. And here the game has earned a 7 out of 15. The game is obviously presented in a third-person perspective, with a realistically, relatably rendered low fantasy world, apart from the sort of zombie-like creatures. The game will also be attempting to utilize combat to get players invested into the game world. A lot of this is going to come from the idea of scarce resources and the notion of one against many, because obviously there are going to be more zombies than there are uninfected, let's put it that way. The game also, especially in the early stages, stresses sneaking around and stealth kills over direct combat. The game will also be attempting to utilize a story to get players invested into the game world, in the sense that in-game events are presented as part of this larger plot, and the player's progress throughout the story is going to govern what areas of the map are available to them. Again, the game will be attempting to use audio to get players invested into the game world, and audio clues are going to provide some important clues to the player about their status, whether or not they've been detected by the zombies or not. Opposition force creatures, for again want of a better phrase. The game will also be attempting to use statistics focus to get players invested in the game world, and this is where some of that crafting and the customization is going to come in, because it does provide some statistics for players to compare and analyze. However, the game does tend to opt for graphs over pure statistics, something that might be adjustable via the in-game settings menu, but by default, it is a simple graph system. The game will also be attempting to utilize player agency to get players invested into the game world, in the sense, and this is a pretty shallow system, you will add, that the players unlock upgrades, as we illustrated with that fourth screenshot, and there is some visual customization. However, it does not seem that any of that visual customization has a gameplay effect, so it doesn't necessarily play into the statistics focus that the game provides. It's purely about allowing the player to feel like that character is their own, and so it fits more naturally into the notion of player agency. And without getting too much further into this, we'll move on to difficulty. And here the game has earned a 2 out of 15. It does only have basic difficulty options. The user interface, on the other hand, is pretty simplistic, and the game also lacks any complicated key commands, like pressing and holding X or left and right shoulder buttons to do something, which some games do have. However, on the other hand, the game does seem to prefer a gamepad, which is not to say that keyboard and mouse are unusable. They certainly are, it's just certain tasks like the motorcycle races are going to be somewhat more difficult with a keyboard and mouse over a gamepad. And with that, I would just remind you that the game has earned a 2 out of 15, and moving right along to Last Appeal. Here the game has earned a 5 out of 15. It does have, broadly speaking, two methods of engaging with the software. There is, of course, a New Game Plus method, but in broad terms, there is only the story and the challenge modes. So that's all we're going to say about that. There is no downloadable content available at present. That may change in the future, not very likely, but we'll leave open the option. The game does not have any support for mods. It does seem from our experience that the optimal way to extend the lasting appeal of the game is to play only for short periods. However, that really applies only to the story. The challenge mode can be played a couple of times, but the ideal play session seems to be about 10 to 15 minutes. And to make sure that the game has the maximum appeal time. And with that, let's move on to our final chapter, which is the overall score. And overall, Days Gone has earned a 4.6 out of 15. It is a fairly average game, but it's leaning a bit lower. There are multiple game modes which offer some additional value. Certainly, it is possible to play through the game in a sort of challenge mode, that is, say, restricting the player artificially, or trying a different difficulty level, but whether the player is actually going to be interested in doing that is up to the player themselves. Now, on the other hand, the game does seem to be a reasonable value for the money, in that it does, which is another way of saying it does provide sufficient content to justify its price tag. On the other hand, the game does not seem particularly suited to long play sessions. It does seem like 15 minutes, maybe 20, is the optimum play session for Days Gone. And on that short bombshell, we will just say that is the end of the video. If you have any comments, disagreements, or requests for other games that you'd like to see on the channel, leave those in the comments section below, and do the other YouTube things. And from 7th Circle Gaming, goodbye.